Hi guys. We are a couple projects into the semester now. We're starting to work with charcoal. So I wanted to do a quick video to kind of talk about shading in particular and some strategies to use while you're shading to kind of help you blend things a little more easily. I'll mention a couple other notes that I'm noticing with your drawings so far, but a lot of you guys are really starting to get into the charcoal, so I think we need to go ahead and talk about the best methods to use when we're blending. So I'm going to do a quick little drawing. I'm going to do a drawing of this Gamsol right here because you guys are working with simple shapes right now, so I wanted to do something fairly equivalent. So it's going to be fairly brief. It's going to be a lot simpler than what we normally do with the drawings. It's not nearly as elaborate as you can get, but the goal is just to kind of show you how to use your charcoal primarily and some good ways to shade. I'm not going to worry about a primary light source here. I'm just going to work on some of the kind of lighter shadows that happen because one thing you'll notice once you start working with values that everything has some element of shading to it. So I don't need a really dramatic light source to still find shadows and more subtlety to kind of work with. So I've got my paper here. I'm all set up to go. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through some of the basic steps I take when starting a drawing. And hopefully this will be helpful. So, like I said, I'm working with charcoal primarily. So I'm going to be starting off with vine charcoal. So with any of my drawings, I start off with a really light gesture to begin. When I say gesture, that means a really rough, kind of loose drawing. I'm not worried too much about getting my details very exact. I'm just trying to get the basic information on the page pretty quickly. And I'm staying really light and faint, and that way I can go back and cover it up. One thing I'm also doing when I'm holding something like this, I'm not going to hold it the way I'd hold a pencil to write my name. I'm going to hold it kind of overhand, kind of like this. So watch me as I kind of start drawing and you'll see what I mean by that. So let's see here. This is a different setup for me. So now one thing also I want to note is like when you're using a larger sheet of paper like this, it's good to try to kind of work with all the space that's in front of you. So you want to try to fill that page pretty well. All right, so we're starting to see some of the basic shapes show up of this bottle. Now the upside, so you can see how I'm holding it kind of like this, and that way I can control my pressure and stay really light. One thing that happens when we hold it the way we'd hold a pencil, we tend to automatically be a little harder with it, and we tend to we tend to draw lines that are a little more fuzzy and shorter because we don't have as much movement with when we hold it like this. If you hold it overhand, you've got full range of motion with your arm. So anyway, I'm staying light so that if I wanted to rub out a lot of it and erase it, it erases really easily this way. So it allows me to still make a lot of changes in the drawing. Now let's keep going just a little bit here. I'm going to get a little heavier here. You know, this is kind of an interesting shape because it's clear. It's going to give me some challenges. Also because it's got a lot of really perfect straight lines, and that's one thing that I'm certainly not great at. I tend to prefer to draw faces and more organic forms because you can get away with more flaws there. But anyway, I'm just kind of going around and making sure, I mean, my main goal is to make sure I've got a lot of symmetry going on with a shape like this. You can already tell like this curve has more space on the left than it does on the right here. So I'm going to take this out just a little bit more and bring this line down. Okay, we're looking fairly balanced here. And we've got a little neck that shows up, so we can give that a little bit of something. And I'm also going to be, you know, probably going to draw a little heavier than I would for a normal drawing just to make sure it shows up on camera. Now, let's see, let's add the bottom of the label down here. One thing you guys will also notice, like we're thinking about perspective as we start to work through drawings like this. And one thing I notice is I want to make sure that the curves that I see for the top of the lid versus the edge here versus this bottom edge, I want to make sure they make sense on the form. So since from where I'm standing, I'm looking down, I'm seeing some of this top edge here. Now from the camera angle right now, you're actually seeing it as almost a flat line. So when I look at it, I see this. So I make sure I draw this kind of shape right here. And that's what we see going on like this. And then as I go down the form, I notice that like the top of the label kind of matches pretty close to that curve up there. The bottom of the label matches that same curve. The bottom of the shape matches that same curve. So that's a really easy way to make sure that perspective lines up. Anyway, back to our main focus, shading. Now, one perk of holding your charcoal on the side like that is it makes it a lot easier to shade larger areas at once too. So I'm not doing like a little scribble kind of thing. Instead, I can turn it flat and shade kind of a broader area. One thing you can also do, these come in really long sticks normally, so you can break it down to a size that's more comfortable for you if you want to shade kind of a tighter section. So I'm catching shadow on one side, so I want to go ahead and start to give that a little bit more shadow. So you can see how quickly I can just really start to shade in here. And I'm not going to worry too much about the transparency aspect of this right now. We'll get some of that showing up, but I'm much more concerned with just kind of getting these basic shapes in for today. And I can see through to the back side of the label, so that's what's going on there. And I can go ahead and start to make this lid pretty dark here too. Now, it's a bit of a mess so far. Now, you guys have probably already noticed, like, you can use your hands and blend pretty well. It's going to be a little rough, but that's one way that a lot of people immediately kind of start blending, is just using your fingers there to kind of smooth things down. And you might do that for the first layer. One thing you'll notice with charcoal is it really kind of has to build on itself to start to really gain a presence on the page. So you'll find that you need to add a couple layers. So you might shade, blend it a little bit, shade it more, blend it a little bit, and kind of keep working through. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch to my heavier charcoal now, just to show you what I can do with this now. So this is compressed charcoal, which is the other material on your supply list. A lot of you guys have already started using it, which is great. And it comes in different shapes, but a lot of them are pretty commonly these kind of stick pieces here. So I'm going to go ahead and start shading in some areas. I want to look for where the darkest spots are. So obviously this lid is pretty heavy. I'm going to go ahead and get kind of dark with that. And again, I'm holding it on the side. I'm not holding it like I'd hold a pencil to write my name. I'm holding it kind of on the side here. And I can go ahead and kind of get that in there. Now, one other tool you have is your kneaded eraser. So that will look kind of like silly putty or something, kind of, you know, when you first buy it, it's in that square shape a lot of times, but you take it out of the plastic and knead it up because it's meant to be kind of balled up like this. And over time it might start to get really grungy and dark looking, so you can see the difference in those two. But typically, like, if it starts to get really bad, you can kind of tear it up and put it back together, and it cleans itself a little bit. So that was pretty dark a second ago, and now you can see it's gotten just a little bit lighter. This one's, I've been using this one a long time, so it's going to be, they hit a certain point where you just can't clean them anymore. So, all right, but what I wanted to show you with this is I can use this as a really nice blending tool for my charcoal. So I'm going to go over, I'm not pressing in as heavy as I would if I wanted to fully like erase out the whole thing, but I'm just kind of softly kind of going over. I might give it a little bit more pressure. And you can see it does lighten up as you do that. So if you want it to stay pretty dark, you'll have to kind of go back in. And I'm also noticing like my shape has gotten really pretty wonky here, so I'm going to have to really make sure I maintain that symmetry that I'm going for. So let's bit larger of a, that looks better to me. All right, and then we'll go back in with our eraser, kind of blend it out a little bit more. And then finally, you also have another type of harder eraser, so you can get these white ones. They also make black erasers, which are supposed to be better for charcoal. Sometimes they're better than others. But I can use that to kind of clean up my shape and get a nice clean line on that outer edge after I've made it such a mess. Now, one tool you might also want, I try to keep a little brush with me, because when I get all these kind of eraser marks everywhere, it helps me to just kind of get that junk up out of the way. All right, so let's do a little bit more shading here. Do a little bit more shading here. Go ahead and kind of blend it in. Now, one other thing I recommended was just like a paper towel. Some people find a lot of luck with that as a blending tool, so you can use something like that to kind of blend in these areas. And you'll notice, like, you hit a point and it'll still leave a lot of substance behind with that charcoal. But my goal really is to get a lot of tone to this shape pretty quickly. Now, one other thing I talked to you guys in a lot of comments about on your assignments is making sure not to get too heavy with your outlines. I think when we have a habit when we're first learning to draw, even when we've been drawing for a little while, we have this habit of, like, we try to get our shape in, and then when we get happy with it, we're like, yes, it's starting to look good. I'm gonna carve it into stone and make the hardest outline I can. And then we end up with something that has this really completely symmetrical outline around the entire thing. And that can be a problem. It starts to look a little more graphic. It doesn't have the volume that we want. It starts to kind of flatten the whole shape out a little bit. Because the reality is, like, the way we see light hitting one side different from another means that the outlines that we draw should be different. If light's hitting more on one side, that side should be much lighter. So if we have an outline there, it should be really faint and not very visible, versus on the other side, it should be pretty dark to give us a suggestion of all that shadow hitting. So let's see here. One thing you'll also notice a lot of times, like at the very base of an object, that's where you'll see more of a shadow show up. So just by kind of going through and adding a little bit of shadow right there, that already starts to give it just a little bit more weight to it, a little bit more presence. Now I'll go back in and kind of smooth it down. One other tool you can have is a blending stump, which is basically rolled paper that you use to just kind of smooth things down. But you can use that to kind of smooth down more tighter details. In this case, it's not really necessary as much. I'm probably just going to go back to my good old kneaded eraser. Because I feel like that tends to work a little bit better. Go a little bit more here. All right, and we can get a bit more of a blend. And sometimes, you know, it's going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more pressure to really get things to start to lighten up the way you want them to. So you'll notice I'm kind of cranking at it a few times. I do prefer to work from an easel, mostly because it allows me to, like, control my pressure a little bit better than when I'm sitting at a desk. I know not everyone has an easel, so that's something to consider. If you're going to be doing a lot more drawing and a lot more painting in particular, then an easel is a good investment. You can get really cheap ones these days. But besides the point. Let me get a little more shadow going on here. And I'm actually going to go back to my eraser here. So I'm wanting to catch more shadow on this one side, so I'm really kind of going back in with a little bit heavier. I would say, like, overall, like, don't be afraid to go pretty dark and then try to lighten things up if you're being faint with it. You know, if you're really cranking on it, if you're putting a lot of pressure, it's gonna be a lot harder to erase. But typically I find that most students tend to be more kind of too afraid to go as dark as they need to when they're shading things in. And that often leads to kind of some of the bigger issues of just not getting quite where you want it. Now one last tool, if you can find detail erasers too that have these kind of thin little points, and those help you get some cleaner shapes going on. So like I want to get a couple suggestions of kind of the grooves going on here. So I'm going to use this eraser here for that idea. So you can see how like this the eraser really serves to do a lot of work in your drawing to really kind of define things for you. So it is definitely in your best interest to kind of start getting used to using it. Let's see here, let's do one more. Now with that kneaded eraser, like when you're using it, you can kind of shape the ends just a little bit to kind of get more definition out of it. Let's get a little bit more. Let's see here. So. And one thing I'm also doing, you know, at the start, I told you I start with more of that kind of gestural shape. So now I'm just going back and kind of cleaning up a lot of those stray lines to kind of help it feel just a little bit more refined as a shape. And I'm going to erase this out. And I can also add some highlights here. Now these this sharper eraser, this hard white eraser is going to be better for kind of more concrete scrubbing out of details and things like that. So you're going to use it when you want more kind of sharp white lines, or when you want to actually do a lot more kind of aggressive erasing here. Let's see here, let's actually lighten a lot of that up. Okay. Let's get just a little bit going on down here. All right, so that's kind of our basic information I wanted to make sure we covered with this video. So short and sweet, kind of a simple drawing. You know, you could go back and do quite a bit more. Actually, let's go back and just add a really bright highlight right there. There we go. I feel a little bit better about that. Cool. So hopefully that covered some of the comments I was giving you guys in terms of like how to address shading and filling in the spaces just a little bit more. You'll notice like the whole area's got at least some shading going on to it. Now, a lot of times I also want to think about like what I do for a background, how to fill that page a little bit more, but since this was just an object study, in this case, I'm not going to go too far into that. So hopefully that's helpful. I'll be giving you guys more and more comments as we roll along in the semester. Keep up the good work. Thanks a lot.